The radio crackled at 3:17 a.m. Tower 7, this is base. Do you copy? I sat up in my cot, the metal frame creaking under me. The dispatcher's voice sounded wrong. Too careful, like she was trying not to wake something up. Tower 7, copy. What's going on, Sarah? We're getting some weird readings from your sector. Your motion sensors triggered about 20 minutes ago. You see anything out there? I pressed my face to the window. The forest stretched out below me, endless black punctuated by the silver reflection of moonlight on distant peaks. Nothing moved. Nothing ever moved up here except the occasional deer or bear, and they didn't usually trip the sensors this close to the tower. Negative. All quiet. Copy that. Just keep your eyes open, okay? There's been some strange activity reported from the other towers tonight. The radio went silent. I waited for her to explain what kind of strange activity, but the silence stretched on until I realized she wasn't going to elaborate. I've been working Fire Lookout for 3 seasons now, and Sarah had never called in the middle of the night for motion sensor alerts. Usually, she'd just log it and check with us in the morning. Bears and deer were common enough that we didn't lose sleep over them. But tonight felt different. The air was too still, too quiet. I pulled on my boots and climbed the stairs to the observation deck. The tower swayed slightly in what should have been wind, but I couldn't feel any breeze. 40 feet above the forest floor, I had a clear view for miles in every direction. During the day, I could see Tower 4 to the south and Tower 9 to the north, tiny wooden structures perched on their own metal stilts like me. Tonight, I couldn't see either of them, not because of weather or haze. The moon was full and bright, visibility perfect, but where Tower 4 should have been, there was only darkness, like someone had turned off all their lights, or like the tower wasn't there at all. I grabbed my binoculars and focused on the coordinates I knew by heart. Tower 4 sat on a ridge about 6 miles south, manned by a guy named Marcus who'd been doing this job longer than anyone. He always kept his beacon light on at night, had for 8 years straight. Said it helped him sleep, knowing other people could see him out there. The ridge was empty. I swung the binoculars north toward Tower 9. Same thing. No lights, no structure, just empty forest where Janet's tower should have been. My hand started shaking. I lowered the binoculars and keyed the radio. Base, this is Tower 7. I can't see 4 or 9. Are they still there? Static answered me. Then Sarah's voice, fainter now. Say again, Tower 7. I said I can't see the other towers. 4, 9. They're just gone. Long pause. Tower 7. Our records show all towers are operational and staffed. Check your equipment. I checked my binoculars, cleaned the lenses, adjusted the focus. Still nothing where the tower should be. Equipment's fine, Base. I'm telling you, they're not there. Stand by, Tower 7. I waited. The radio stayed quiet for so long I thought Sarah had forgotten about me. Then, barely audible through the static, Marcus and Janet checked in at midnight. All normal. You sure you're looking in the right direction? I knew these coordinates better than my own address. I've been staring at those 2 towers every day for 3 years. They were as familiar to me as my own reflection. But they weren't there. I'm sure. I said into the radio. Base, I think something's wrong. Static. Then nothing. I tried calling again. The radio wouldn't transmit. The display showed full power, all systems green, but when I pressed the talk button, nothing happened. Like the signal was being blocked, or like there was no one left to answer. I spent the next hour trying different frequencies, adjusting the antenna, checking connections. Nothing worked. The radio received signals fine. I could hear chatter from other districts, weather reports, even some late-night trucker conversations bleeding through from the interstate 40 miles away. But I couldn't transmit anything. I was receiving the world, but the world couldn't hear me back. The isolation wasn't new. I'd always been good at being alone. Had to be growing up in foster care. 5 different homes between ages 8 and 18, each one teaching me that the only person I could count on was myself. The first family returned me after 6 months because I was too withdrawn. The second kept me for 2 years before deciding they wanted a younger child, someone who might actually bond with them. The third lasted 8 months before the husband lost his job, and they couldn't afford another mouth to feed. By the time I aged out of the system, I had learned that getting attached to people only led to disappointment. When I found this job, the isolation felt like a gift. No one to disappoint, no one to let down, no one to leave. But sitting in that tower, unable to reach the outside world, I realized there was a difference between being alone and being abandoned. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the radio, monitoring the frequencies. At 4:30 a.m., I heard Tower 12 checking in with base. Tower 12, all clear. No smoke, no unusual activity. I didn't recognize the voice, but that wasn't unusual. The Forest Service rotated staff regularly, and I didn't know everyone in the district. Copy, Tower 12. How about you, Tower 15? Another voice I didn't recognize. Tower 15, all quiet here. I grabbed my district map and spread it out on the table. There was no Tower 12. No Tower 15. The highest numbered tower in our district was Tower 9, and there were only 12 towers total. But I listened to 17 different towers check in over the next hour. Towers with numbers that didn't exist, in locations I couldn't identify, staffed by people whose voices I'd never heard before. When Sarah asked for my check-in, I tried to respond, but the radio still wouldn't transmit. She waited 30 seconds, then moved on to Tower 18. I wasn't just cut off from communication. I was being erased from it. Dawn came slowly, the sky lightening from black to deep purple to pale gray. I stayed at the observation deck, binoculars in hand, watching the ridges where Towers 4 and 9 should have been. As the sun rose higher, I could see the landscape clearly. The ridges were there, but they were wrong. Where Tower 4 should have stood, there was unbroken forest. Old growth forest, trees that would have taken decades to mature. Not the cleared circle of maintained ground that surrounded every fire tower. It was like Tower 4 had never existed. I focused the binoculars on Tower 9's location. Same thing. Mature forest. No sign that humans had ever been there. But I could remember both towers clearly. I could picture Marcus on his observation deck, a tall man with graying hair who always wore the same red flannel shirt. I could see Janet's tower, her neat garden of wildflowers around the base, the wind chimes she'd hung from the railing that you could hear on quiet mornings. I had 3 years of memories involving those towers, those people, but according to the landscape spread out below me, none of it had ever happened. I spent the morning trying to convince myself I was wrong. Maybe I'd been looking in the wrong direction. Maybe the towers were just hidden by some trick of light and shadow. Maybe Sarah was right about isolation playing tricks on my mind. But every time I checked my compass, every time I referenced my maps, I was looking in exactly the right places. The towers were gone, and somehow, I was the only one who remembered they'd ever been there. The radio crackled at 7 a.m. Tower 7, this is base. Morning check-in. How's everything looking out there? Sarah's voice sounded normal, cheerful, even, like nothing had happened. I keyed the radio, and for the first time since 3 a.m., it transmitted. Base, where are the other towers? Other towers? What do you mean? 4 and 9. They're gone. They vanished during the night. Silence. Then, Tower 7. I'm showing all towers operational and staffed. You feeling okay up there? Sometimes the isolation can play tricks on your mind. I stared at the empty ridges. In full daylight, I could see the access roads that led to the tower sites. But they ended at the forest edge, like they'd been abandoned mid-construction. I'm fine, I said, but something happened last night. The towers are gone. Okay, let's try this. Can you give me a status report on your sector? Any smoke? Any unusual activity? I scanned the forest below. Everything looked normal. Green canopy stretching to the horizon. No sign of fire or disturbance. All clear, I said. Good. We'll check back at noon. Base out. The radio went silent. I tried calling Tower 4 directly, using Marcus's call sign. No response. Tried Tower 9. Nothing. But when I listened to the general frequency, I heard Tower 23 checking in. Then Tower 31. Towers that couldn't possibly exist, with call signs I'd never heard before. I pulled out my personnel directory, a laminated sheet that listed all the towers in the district and their assigned staff. According to the directory, there were 12 towers, numbered 1 through 12. I was Tower 7. Marcus was Tower 4. Janet was Tower 9. But when I looked at the sheet again an hour later, it had changed. Now it showed 37 towers, with numbers scattered seemingly at random. Tower 7 was still listed, still assigned to me. But Towers 4 and 9 weren't on the list at all. I checked the back of the sheet for a revision date. It was printed 3 years ago, the same date as the original directory I remembered. But the content was completely different. I was holding 2 different versions of the same document, printed on the same date, but containing contradictory information. I spent the rest of the morning trying to make sense of what was happening. I checked every piece of documentation in the tower, every map, every reference sheet. Some of them matched my memories, others didn't. It was like reality was inconsistent, shifting between different versions of itself. The only thing that remained constant was my presence in Tower 7. Every document, every map, every personnel list included me. I was the fixed point around which everything else changed. At noon, Sarah called for the check-in. This time, I was ready with questions. Base, how many towers are in this district? 37, same as always. When was the last time you spoke with Marcus at Tower 4? Tower 7. I don't have any Marcus in our personnel files. You sure you got the right name? What about Janet at Tower 9? No Janet either. You want to walk me through who you think you've been talking to? I couldn't answer that. I couldn't explain 3 years of conversations, shared meals during training sessions, borrowed equipment, friendly arguments about the best techniques for spotting distant smoke. I couldn't explain memories that felt real, but apparently had never happened. Never mind, I said. Everything's fine here. You sure? You sound a little stressed. Just tired. Okay, get some rest. We'll talk tonight. The radio went silent, and I was alone with my confusion. I decided to check my personal belongings for evidence of Marcus and Janet. In my footlocker, I found letters from both of them. Marcus's Christmas card from last year, with a photo of his grandchildren. Janet's recipe for the cornbread she'd shared during the spring training session. But when I looked at the letters again an hour later, they were different. The Christmas card was now from my cousin in Portland, someone I barely spoke to. Janet's recipe had become a grocery list in my own handwriting. Reality was rewriting itself around me, erasing evidence of my colleagues, my friends, my connections to other people. I was being isolated not just physically, but historically. My past was being edited to remove everyone except myself. I tried to fight it by writing everything down. I started a journal, documenting everything I could remember about Marcus and Janet, about the other towers, about the conversations we'd had. I wrote for hours, filling pages with details, trying to create a record that couldn't be changed. But when I finished and read back through what I'd written, half of it had already changed. The stories about Marcus had become stories about me talking to myself. The descriptions of Janet's tower had become descriptions of empty forest. The journal was rewriting itself as I watched. I threw the pen across the room and screamed. The sound echoed off the walls of the cabin, then faded into the forest below. No one heard me. No one answered. I was losing not just my present, but my past. Everything that connected me to other people was being systematically erased, leaving me truly alone in a way I'd never imagined possible. That afternoon, I tried a different approach. Instead of fighting the changes, I decided to document them. I created a log of everything I observed, noting when things changed and how. Maybe I could find a pattern, some logic to what was happening. At 2:15 p.m., I counted 17 towers checking in on the radio. At 2:45 p.m., I counted 23. At 3:30 p.m., there were 31. The number kept growing, but I couldn't locate any of the new towers. When I asked for their coordinates, Sarah told me I didn't have clearance for that information. Clearance? I'm part of this district. I need to know where the other towers are. Tower 7, you're on a need-to-know basis. Just focus on your own sector. Need-to-know basis. In 3 years of working this job, I never heard that phrase. We were all part of the same team, shared information freely, helped each other spot fires and track weather patterns. Now I was being treated like an outsider. At 4 p.m., I heard my own voice on the radio. Tower 7, all clear. No smoke, no unusual activity. But I hadn't made that transmission. I was sitting in my chair, listening to someone else report and using my call sign in my voice. Copy, Tower 7, Sarah responded. Good work. I grabbed the radio. Base, this is Tower 7. I didn't just check in. Static. Then Sarah's voice. Tower 7, You just reported in 30 seconds ago. You feeling confused up there? That wasn't me. Tower 7. I'm looking at my log. You checked in at 1600 hours. Reported all clear. Your voice print matches our records. I stare at the radio. Someone or something was impersonating me, making reports in my voice. But according to Base, those fake reports were being treated as authentic. Base, I need to speak with a supervisor. Tower 7, I am your supervisor. Now, you've been up there for a while. Maybe it's time to consider rotation back to base for a few days. How long have I been up here? Since the beginning of the season. About 6 months. 6 months. That couldn't be right. I remembered starting this rotation 3 weeks ago, scheduled for a 2-month stint. But when I checked my personal calendar, my personal supplies, the wear on my equipment, everything suggested months of occupancy. I was missing time. Lots of it. Base, what's today's date? July 15th. July 15th. I remembered starting this assignment in late June. But if I've been here for 6 months, I should have started in January. In the middle of winter, when the towers were normally unoccupied. Nothing added up. I spent the rest of the afternoon searching through my belongings for clues about the missing time. In my duffel bag, I found a journal I didn't remember keeping. It was filled with weather observations in my handwriting, dating back to January 1st. According to the journal, I'd been reporting temperature, wind conditions, and visibility every day for 6.5 months. The entries were detailed, consistent, exactly the kind of records I would keep. But I had no memory of writing any of them. The last entry I remembered making was 3 weeks ago. Everything after that was a blank. I read through the journal carefully, looking for clues about what had happened during the missing months. The entries were routine at first, standard weather observations and equipment checks. But gradually, they became stranger. February 12th, radio acting up again. Sarah's voice keeps cutting out, like she's speaking from very far away. March 3rd, saw lights in the forest last night. Not headlights or campfires. Something else. They moved through the trees like they were floating. April 15th, the motion sensors triggered 17 times last night. Nothing on the cameras. Whatever's out there doesn't show up on film. May 8th, Tower 4 hasn't checked in for 3 days. Base says they're operational, but I can't see Marcus's beacon light. June 2nd, I think I'm being watched. Can't shake the feeling that something is out there, studying me. June 30th, the other towers are disappearing. One by one, they're going dark. I think I'm the only one left. The entry stopped there. The next page was blank, and everything after that was empty. According to my own journal, the towers have been disappearing gradually over the course of months. Marcus and Janet hadn't vanished overnight. They'd been going dark one by one, and I'd been documenting it all without remembering any of it. I was living through the same horror repeatedly, losing my memory each time, rediscovering the isolation over and over again. But why? What was causing the memory loss? What was making the other towers disappear? I decided to stay awake that night and watch for the strange lights mentioned in the journal. If I was going to lose my memory again, I wanted to understand what was happening first. I made a pot of strong coffee and settled into the observation chair with my binoculars. The sun set at 8:47 p.m., and by 9:30, the forest was completely dark except for the moonlight filtering through the canopy. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just the normal sounds and shadows of nighttime in the forest. An owl hooted somewhere to the west. Small animals rustled through the undergrowth. The wind whispered through the trees. But gradually, I became aware of something else. A presence, patient and watchful. At 11:20 p.m., I saw the first light. It appeared deep in the forest, maybe 2 miles southeast of my position. A soft blue glow, moving slowly between the trees. At first, I thought it might be a hiker with a flashlight, but the movement was wrong. Too smooth, too fluid. It drifted through the forest like it was floating 6 feet above the ground. I focused my binoculars on it, but the light was too distant and too dim to make out any details. It moved in a straight line for about 10 minutes, then suddenly disappeared. 20 minutes later, another light appeared, this one closer to my tower. Same blue glow, same floating movement. It circled my position once, staying just at the edge of the tree line, then vanished as suddenly as the first. I checked the motion sensors. Nothing. The lights were real, but they weren't triggering any of my detection equipment. Whatever they were, They existed in a way that technology couldn't perceive. At 12:45 a.m., I saw 3 lights moving together, heading directly toward my tower. They emerged from the forest and stopped at the base of the metal structure, 40 feet below me. I could see them clearly now. They weren't lights in the conventional sense. They were more like tears in the darkness, windows into somewhere else. Through them, I could see glimpses of other places, other times. In one, I saw Tower 4, fully operational, with Marcus waving from his observation deck. In another, I saw Janet tending her wildflower garden. In the third, I saw myself, but younger, just starting this job, excited about the solitude and independence it offered. The lights were showing me the past, the things that had been erased, the connections that had been severed, the isolation that had been gradually imposed on me. I understood then that the lights weren't malevolent. They were trying to show me what I'd lost, what had been taken from me. They were evidence of a reality that was being systematically deleted. But by whom and why? The answer came at 2:43 a.m. when I saw movement in the trees directly below the tower. At first, I thought it was a person, human-shaped, walking upright through the undergrowth. But as it moved closer to the tower, I realized it was too tall, too thin. Its limbs moved wrong, bending in places where joints shouldn't exist. It stopped at the base of my tower and looked up. I couldn't see its face in the darkness, but I could feel its attention like a physical weight. We stared at each other across 40 feet of empty air, and I understood with perfect clarity that it could see me as well as I could see it. The radio crackled. "You're the last one," it said in Sarah's voice. "The only one left." I grabbed the handset, but before I could respond, the transmission cut out. When I looked down, the figure was gone. But now I understood what was happening. Something was harvesting my connections. One by one, it was taking away everyone I knew, everyone I cared about, until I was completely alone. And somehow, it was making me forget each loss, forcing me to live through the isolation repeatedly without building up any resistance to it. I spent the rest of the night shining my flashlight into the forest, looking for any sign of what I'd seen. The beam illuminated tree trunks and undergrowth, but nothing else. Nothing that could explain the shape I'd witnessed. When morning came, I found footprints in the dirt around the tower's base. Bare feet, human-sized but wrong somehow. The toes were too long, the heel too narrow. They circled the tower 3 times before disappearing into the forest. I photographed the prints with my camera, documenting everything I could. If I was going to lose my memory again, I wanted to leave evidence for myself to find. But even as I worked, I could feel the evidence changing. When I looked at the photos on my camera's display, they showed normal human footprints. When I looked at the actual prints in the dirt, they were already fading, becoming less distinct. Reality was editing itself in real time, removing proof of what I'd experienced. I tried to call base, but the radio wouldn't transmit. The display showed full power, but when I pressed the talk button, nothing happened. I was completely cut off again. I decided to hike down to the base of the tower and examine the footprints more closely before they disappeared entirely. Maybe I could find other evidence, something that would help me understand what was happening. The climb down was harder than usual. The metal ladder seemed longer than I remembered, and by the time I reached the ground, my legs were shaking with exhaustion. I'd made this climb hundreds of times, but today it felt like descending into a different world. The footprints were still there, but they looked different in daylight. Older somehow, like they'd been made months ago instead of hours. The edges were softened by weather, partially filled with fallen leaves. I knelt beside them and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The prints were definitely human in origin, but they were wrong in subtle ways. The arch was too high, the toes spread too wide, like someone had tried to imitate human feet, but had gotten the proportions slightly off. I followed the trail into the forest, my compass in one hand, my radio in the other. The path was easy to follow at first, but after a quarter mile, it started to branch and diverge. Multiple sets of tracks, all heading in different directions. Some of the prints were fresh, made recently. Others were older, weathered by rain and time. It was like the same creature had been walking these paths for months or years, wearing grooves in the earth with its repeated journeys. I chose the path that seemed newest and followed it deeper into the forest. The trees grew thicker here, blocking out most of the sunlight. The air was cooler, damper, filled with the smell of decay and rich earth. After an hour of hiking, I found something that made me stop in my tracks. A clearing, maybe 30 feet across, where nothing grew. The ground was bare dirt, packed hard by countless footsteps, and scattered around the edges of the clearing were objects I recognized. Marcus's red flannel shirt, hanging from a branch like a flag. Janet's wind chimes, silent in the still air. Personal belongings from dozens of people, arranged in a rough circle around the clearing. Clothes, books, photographs, tools, all of them showing signs of long exposure to the elements. In the center of the clearing was a structure I couldn't immediately identify. It looked like a radio antenna, but made from organic materials. Twisted branches and vines formed a tall spire, with smaller appendages branching off at regular intervals. The whole thing pulsed with a faint light, like a heartbeat made visible. I approached it carefully, my camera ready. But when I tried to take a photo, the display showed only empty forest. The antenna was invisible to technology, just like the lights I'd seen the night before. I circled the structure, looking for clues about its purpose. Near the base, I found a collection of items that made my blood run cold. Radio equipment, dozens of transceivers, all tuned to different frequencies. Some were old and corroded, others looked recent. All of them were active, their displays glowing softly in the dim light. I recognized some of the frequencies. They were the ones used by the fire lookout towers. The radios were intercepting our communications, copying our voices, learning to imitate us. That's how the thing had been able to impersonate me on the radio. It had been recording my voice, my speech patterns, my daily reports. It could make base think I was checking in normally while I was actually isolated and forgotten. But why? What was the point of this elaborate deception? I found the answer in a notebook tucked under one of the radios. The pages were filled with handwriting I didn't recognize, but the content was all about me. Subject shows increasing signs of isolation stress. Responds well to gradual removal of social contacts. Memory modification successful. Subject does not retain awareness of previous erasures. Phase 3 complete. All other tower personnel removed from subject's reality. Subject now exists in controlled isolation environment. Subject demonstrates remarkable adaptation to solitude. Continues to perform duties despite complete social disconnection. Excellent candidate for long-term study. I was reading a research log. Someone was studying me, using me as a test subject in some kind of isolation experiment. The disappearing towers, the missing people, the memory gaps, it was all artificial. All designed to see how long a person could survive in complete isolation without losing their sanity. But who was conducting this experiment? And why had they chosen me? I found those answers in the final entries of the notebook. Subject's background makes her ideal for this study. History of abandonment, preference for solitude, strong work ethic. She will continue to perform her duties, even under extreme isolation conditions. Dr. Martinez has approved extension of study period. Subject will be maintained in isolation indefinitely. Her work performance remains excellent despite complete social disconnection. Note: subject occasionally shows signs of awareness regarding her situation. Memory modification protocols may need to be strengthened. Dr. Martinez. I knew that name. He'd been the psychologist who'd interviewed me before I got this job, the one who'd recommended me for the position. He'd asked a lot of questions about my childhood, my relationships, my comfort with solitude. I thought he was just being thorough. Now I realized he'd been screening me for this experiment. The notebook contained maps showing the locations of the real towers, the ones that had been shut down to create my isolation. Marcus and Janet were alive, but they'd been transferred to other districts. The towers I remembered were real, but they'd been deliberately removed from my environment. I was living in an artificial reality, a carefully constructed prison designed to keep me isolated while I unknowingly participated in a psychological study. The rage hit me like a physical blow. 3 years of my life, stolen. Friendships, connections, relationships, all erased for the sake of someone's research. I'd been turned into a lab rat, monitored and manipulated without my knowledge or consent. I grabbed the notebook and started back toward my tower. I had evidence now, proof of what had been done to me. I could expose this, demand justice, get my life back. But as I hiked through the forest, The notebook in my hands began to change. The handwriting shifted, becoming my own. The research notes transformed into weather observations. By the time I reached the tower, I was holding my own journal, filled with routine entries about temperature and wind speed. The evidence was being erased, even as I tried to preserve it. I climbed back up to the cabin and tried to call base, but the radio still wouldn't transmit. I was trapped in my artificial reality, unable to communicate with the outside world, unable to prove what had been done to me. That's when I realized the truth about the figure I'd seen in the forest. It wasn't the researcher. It wasn't Dr. Martinez or his assistants. It was me. I was the thing that had been walking through the forest at night, leaving those strange footprints. The isolation had been going on for so long that I'd started to dissociate, to split off parts of myself that I couldn't consciously accept. The part of me that knew the truth, that remembered what had been taken from me, had been trying to communicate with my conscious mind. The lights in the forest were memories, fragments of my real past that my subconscious was trying to preserve. I was my own guardian and my own prison guard. The realization should have been liberating. If I was the one creating these manifestations, then I had the power to stop them. I could choose to remember, to break free from the artificial constraints that had been placed on my mind. But when I tried to hold on to the knowledge, it slipped away like water through my fingers. The memory modification was too strong, too deeply embedded. Every time I came close to understanding my situation, the conditioning would kick in and reset my awareness. I was trapped in a loop, discovering my imprisonment over and over again, but never able to break free from it. The radio crackled at sunset. Tower 7, this is base. Evening check-in. Sarah's voice, but I could hear the artificial quality now. The slight delay, the too perfect diction. It was a recording, played back by the antenna in the forest. Base, I know what you're doing to me, I said into the radio. Tower 7, you're not making sense. Are you feeling all right? I found the research notes. I know about Dr. Martinez. I know about the experiment. Silence. Then, Tower 7, you're showing signs of stress. We're going to send someone up to check on you. There is no we. There's just me, talking to a machine. Tower 7, please remain calm. Help is on the way. The radio went dead. I sat in the growing darkness, waiting. I knew no help was coming. There was no base to send anyone from. The whole support structure of my job was artificial, designed to keep me functioning while I was studied. But I also knew that something would come. The part of me that was maintaining this illusion wouldn't let me become too aware of the truth. It would intervene, reset my memory, put me back in the loop. I decided to write everything down, to create a record that might survive the next memory wipe. I filled pages with everything I learned, everything I discovered. I wrote about the clearing in the forest, the research notes, the artificial nature of my isolation. As I wrote, I could feel the memories fading. The words on the page began to blur, to change, to become something else. But I kept writing, hoping that some fragment of truth would survive. I wrote until my hand cramped, until my eyes burned, until I could barely see the paper in front of me. And when I finally stopped, I had filled an entire notebook with my story. I looked at what I'd written and saw only weather observations. The truth had been erased again. I threw the notebook across the room and screamed. The sound echoed through the cabin, through the forest, up into the star-filled sky. But there was no one to hear me, no one to answer. I was alone with my artificial reality, trapped in a prison of my own mind. That's when I heard the footsteps on the ladder. Slow, deliberate steps, climbing up from the forest floor. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it down through the hatch. I could see a figure on the ladder, but it was too dark to make out any details. Who's there? I called out. The figure stopped climbing but didn't answer. I could hear its breathing, harsh and labored, like it was struggling with each step. I said, "Who's there?" Still no answer. The figure resumed climbing, getting closer to the cabin. I backed away from the hatch, my heart pounding. This was it. This was the intervention I'd been expecting. The part of me that maintained the illusion was coming to reset my memory, to put me back in the loop. But I wasn't going to go quietly. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and positioned myself by the hatch. When the figure reached the top, I was ready. The hatch opened, and I saw myself. Not exactly myself, but close enough. Same height, same build, same face. But wrong in subtle ways, like the footprints I'd found. The proportions were slightly off, the movements too fluid. It was me but not me. The part of me that had been split off, that had been wandering the forest at night, that had been maintaining this elaborate deception. You can't keep doing this, I said to my other self. It tilted its head, studying me. When it spoke, it was with my voice, but flatter, more mechanical. You're not ready for the truth. You're still too attached to the past. I have a right to know what happened to me. You have a right to survive. The truth would destroy you. I looked at this other version of myself and realized what had happened. The isolation experiment had been successful beyond Dr. Martinez's wildest dreams. Rather than breaking down under the stress, I'd adapted by splitting my consciousness. Part of me had accepted the artificial reality, while another part had become the guardian of that reality. I'd become both the prisoner and the jailer. How long? I asked. 6 years, it said. You died in a fire tower collapse 6 years ago. The lightning strike, the structural failure, the body they found in the wreckage. That was all real. The words hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't part of an experiment. I wasn't a test subject in some psychological study. I was dead. The towers, the other people, the job, none of it was ever real after that night. You've been creating all of it, maintaining the illusion because you can't accept what happened. I stared at my other self, trying to process what I was hearing. But the research notes, Dr. Martinez, the isolation experiment, stories you told yourself to make sense of the situation. You needed a reason for the isolation, an explanation for why you were alone. The experiment was more palatable than the truth. What truth? That you died alone in a fire tower, doing a job that had already been made obsolete by satellite monitoring. That you died forgotten, unmourned, with no one to miss you because you'd spent your whole life pushing people away. The cruelest part was that it made sense. I'd always been afraid of being abandoned, so I'd abandoned others first. I'd chosen isolation over connection, solitude over vulnerability. And when I died, I've been so alone that death itself couldn't find me. You've been holding on to this job, this reality, because it's the only identity you've ever had. But it's time to let go. What happens if I let go? You move on. You accept what happened and find peace. And if I don't, you stay here forever, creating the same illusions, living the same lies, trapped in the same fear that kept you isolated in life. I looked around the cabin, at the equipment I'd been maintaining, the logs I'd been keeping, the duties I'd been performing. All of it was meaningless if I was dead. All of it was just an elaborate way of avoiding the truth. But it was also all I had left. The other people, I said, Marcus, Janet, Sarah, were they ever real? They were real. But they moved on years ago. You're the only one still here, still pretending the old world exists. I thought about the lights I'd seen in the forest, the glimpses of other times and places. Those hadn't been memories trying to surface. They'd been other spirits, other lost souls, trying to show me that I wasn't alone in death. They're waiting for you, my other self said, as if reading my thoughts. All the people you were too afraid to get close to in life. They're waiting for you to join them. How do I know you're telling the truth? Because I'm you. I'm the part of you that's been trying to break through the illusion. I'm the part that's been leaving footprints in the forest, trying to get your attention, trying to make you remember. I looked at this other version of myself and saw the truth in its eyes. I was dead, had been dead for years, but I'd been too afraid of being alone to accept it. So I'd created an elaborate fantasy, a world where I still had purpose, still had a job to do, still had a reason to exist. But the fantasy was breaking down. The isolation I'd feared in life had become the prison of my death. What do I have to do? Let go. Stop maintaining the illusion. Accept that your shift is over. I walked to the radio and looked at the equipment I'd been using to maintain contact with a world that no longer existed. All of it was powered by my refusal to accept death, my desperate need to keep working, keep watching, keep existing. I reached for the power switch. Wait, I said. If I do this, if I let go, what happens to the tower? It crumbles. It returns to the ash and ruin it became 6 years ago. And the forest. The forest is fine. It's been fine all along. You're the only one who's been trapped here. I thought about the lights I'd seen, the other spirits trying to communicate with me. They've been trying to tell me that death wasn't the end, that there was something beyond the isolation I'd created for myself. I thought about Marcus and Janet, about the friendships I convinced myself were real. Maybe they had been real once. Maybe they were waiting for me somewhere beyond this artificial reality. I thought about the fear that had driven me to this point, the terror of being alone that had kept me clinging to a job, a purpose, an identity that no longer existed. It was time to face that fear. I flipped the power switch. The radio went silent. The lights in the cabin flickered and went out. The tower beneath my feet began to sway, the metal groaning as it lost the structural integrity my belief had been providing. Through the windows, I could see the forest changing. The trees I'd been watching for 6 years faded away, replaced by the burned landscape that had existed since the night I died. The ground was black with ash, the sky gray with smoke that had never fully cleared. This was the real world, the one I'd been hiding from. A world where I'd died alone, forgotten, with no one to mourn my passing. But as the illusion crumbled around me, I saw something else. Lights moving through the burned forest. Not the blue glow of memory, but something warmer. Something that felt like welcome. They were coming for me. The people I'd been too afraid to get close to in life. The connections I'd severed out of fear. The love I'd rejected because I couldn't trust it to last. They were coming to bring me home. The tower collapsed beneath me, but I didn't fall. I rose instead, leaving behind the weight of fear and isolation, leaving behind the job that had become my identity, leaving behind the loneliness that had defined my existence. I rose toward the lights, toward the voices calling my name, toward the connection I'd spent my whole life avoiding. And for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't alone. The official report states that Tower 7 was struck by lightning and destroyed in 2019, killing its sole occupant. The tower was never rebuilt, and the position was eliminated due to budget constraints and advances in satellite monitoring technology. But sometimes, hikers in the area report seeing lights in the forest at night. Not the blue glow of memory or the harsh beam of flashlights, but something warmer, something that feels like welcome. They say if you listen carefully, you can hear voices in the wind. Voices of people who found their way home, who learned that even in death, no one has to be alone forever. Park rangers dismiss these reports as atmospheric phenomena or wishful thinking, but they've stopped assigning overnight patrols to that section of forest. Some jobs, they say, are too important to abandon, even after the shift is over.